Hello everyone, it's me, your favorite Jasper, probably. I'm very tired, it's kind of late, and I have been very sick. Coronavirus? Maybe. And there's holes in my trousers. If I didn't say that, you wouldn't have known it. But I did. So you do. Anyway, I seem like the sort of person who should be a film snob. I'm pretentious, I like movies, and I'm easily engaged in whatever it is that I happen to be watching at the time, which seems important for somebody who's going to be watching films about the meaning of meaning and the silence of God. But my film intake tends to be whatever's popular, plus random recommendations that I might get. You know how you do. Hey man, you should totally watch that movie. Hey man, totally watch that movie. And then you never do, except I do sometimes. Sometimes. Now, being a film snob is very cool these days, especially among YouTubers. Everybody's talking about thematic elements and breaking down the plot and authorial intent. I know what those words mean, so I thought that I'd give it a shot. Since I have an abundance of free time, both normally and now, I thought I'd take a look at some older artistic endeavors to try and figure out exactly what it is that made these things worthwhile or artistic or better than, well, whatever I would make, for example. More to the point, I wanted to figure out if there was anything for me in the world of artistic cinema. So I looked down the list of the best filmmakers from the past few decades to see if there was anything in there that would appeal to me, any of these directors whose style might have something that would speak to me. And going down the list and doing the reading, I found one called Andrei Tarkovsky, who was a Russian filmmaker who worked from the 1960s until his death in the very late 80s. This guy was a Russian filmmaker during Soviet times, which is in and of itself a dangerous proposition, especially if you have anything, to say. What I was told and what I read was that his films were highly emotional and tried to portray the world as the characters saw it, not necessarily how it was literally happening within the story world. So like sounds would be very loud if the character was close to them, even if the camera was very far away from them, or something like that. In his book, which I do intend to finish someday, he talked about how feelings couldn't exactly be captured by a literal, naturalistic view of the world. How you had to use all the tools of filmmaking to create a realistic feeling of a situation instead of a realistic depiction of a situation. And he gives a kind of obscure example, but the basics of it are that a situation may give you a particular feeling in real life, but if you want to give somebody else that particular feeling, you might have to show them something different because there's no way that you could exactly recreate that event and have it have that same emotional resonance if you put it on screen, because it's such a different translation, it would just feel flat. So you have to do a lot of extra stuff to get people to feel that way. So to him, basically, the problem of storytelling, or the puzzle of it, was figuring out how to get the audience to feel the way that he felt. To have them feel a connection to him, a connection to each other, and forward the cause of love, which is more or less a quote from his book as well. Which sounds equal parts ambitious, pretentious, and genuinely having a mission with your art, which is all things that I find really interesting in a person, and so it's something that I really wanted to see if he could bring out. Being a science fiction fan, I looked at his catalog, and Stalker, which that's how you spell stalker in Russian, seemed to me to be the best example of the kind of thing that I would be interested in. He'd kind of built this world. It was based on a novel, but he changed a lot of elements of it. And so world building is very interesting to me. Science fiction's interesting to me. Soviet decay, the decay of Soviet society is an interesting time period and concept to me, and that is kind of dealt with here. There's a lot of poverty and a lot of dissatisfaction with the way that things are going. So all those factors together seemed like a good place for me to start. It follows a stalker, who is a man with unique abilities and training that allow him to traverse the zone, this area that nobody goes into. And supposedly at the center of it is the room. The room, nobody knows quite what it does, but rumor has it that it will fulfill wishes. Nobody knows why. Nobody knows who runs the zone. Is it, aliens? Is it some ancient civilization? Is it God? And so all these questions and doubts sort of fuel different characters' perspectives in the movie. So the stalker is taking two clients, the professor and the writer, and they're going to get to the room. They each have their own reasons for doing this, which are revealed through dialogue. And they philosophize and fight and argue and make their way through this dangerous and bizarre place. I'm not going to break down the movie piece by piece. I'm going to try not... I will spoil it, actually. I take that back. But I will do that later. For now, I want to talk about how this movie struck me as very, very different than anything else that I'd watched in a long, long time. And it was hard for me to figure out what it was that was so different at first. But I watched it with a couple others, parts of it, and their thoughts helped me kind of figure it out a little bit. For one thing, it's very talky. Hardly any scenes have no dialogue. There's almost constant speaking. There are quiet, slow moments as well, but those tend to lead into walls of text. There's an average of less than one shot per minute, so that camera is on and it's staying on. There's a lot of one takes, a lot of slow building moments, and there's a lot of just camera setup and conversation go. You compare that to what we're used to watching in science fiction these days, like Transformers has one shot for every 2.4 seconds. So 30 times more shots in the same amount of time, almost. And that is how we convey action. That's how we convey excitement, is cut, 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 gives it a level of anxiety. Stalker has anxiety, but it doesn't have that energy and that drive and that constant moving feeling. It's slow, it meanders. Literally, the characters do meander a lot because that's how you're supposed to go through the zone. And what hit me the first time watching through was the way that the sound is mixed. There's a lot of rustling and very sparing use of music. It's there and it's synthy. It's very good. And it gives you a feeling of almost tactile. You can almost feel everything being touched and kicked and moved around and rustled. It helps you feel like you're there. It helps you understand what it would feel like to be there. Probably the most engaging part of the movie, though, is the arguments. There's so many arguments between the three main characters throughout the movie, and also between the stalker and his wife. And you just find yourself agreeing almost with whomever is speaking, because they're so well written and so well crafted, and not knowing the world, you kind of just figure that whoever is talking is right until somebody else speaks up, which is also just kind of how human nature works, and maybe I'm particularly susceptible to that. On the action front, which I mentioned a bit ago, there's a bit of peril, and there is two very tense scenes, three maybe, even if you count as they're going into the zone, which is a little cheesy and done pretty cheaply, but it is tense. And there's some gunplay, and there's some, wrestling, kind of. But it's certainly not an action movie. Long stretches of the film are just walking and talking. And so if you're expecting that in a science fiction movie, you will be disappointed in Stalker. I have to say it was not what I was expecting. I was expecting a little bit more action just from my experience with the genre. It's crime, it's science fiction, but hardly any of that. So it was definitely different than what I'm used to. There also isn't a whole lot in the way of sci-fi in this science fiction movie. There's 2 sequences probably that I would describe as science fiction-y, but they're so ambiguous that it's hard to say really what is going on or what it's supposed to mean in terms of the world or to the wider story, especially the last one. The final scene of the movie is confusing. I suppose if you know the book, it makes more sense, but I don't, so it doesn't. I'm really not sure what it's there for other than world building. My point is, this is a very grown-up science fiction movie. It poses questions. There's no laser guns or world-ending stakes. Instead, we're talking about people, their struggles, and their fears. And spoilers ahead, none of them enter the room, so we don't get definitive answers on what the room even is, or how it works, or whether or not it works. And that ambiguity is a huge part of the message of the movie, as I understand it. And that's a big thing with a movie like this, as I understand it. The ambiguity is intentional. The stalker doesn't enter the room, he's forbidden, and he's the only true believer left. So this whole film is building up to something that's never seen and never fulfilled. So the story explores themes of faith, doubt, the value of art, the value of science, and questions of how much good one person can do for somebody else. And now this brings me to something else that's quite noticeable about the film, and that's the religious symbolism. There's 2 different readings of Bible verses, one right after the other. I'm not really sure what either of them have to do with the plot, or the story, or the world, or the characters. One is apocalyptic from Revelation, and one is about Jesus explaining things to his disciples after his resurrection. I don't know how those relate to anything going on in the film. I'm sure that somebody who's more well-versed in allegory would be able to tell you, but I'm not, so I can't. Oh yeah, and there's also this, pretty on the nose, but it's not exactly what you think. The character, as he's putting that on, says the line, "I'm not going to forgive you," which is not a very Jesus thing to say. So, again, it muddles the allegory on purpose, but I'm not sure for what purpose, which is, I'm sure how these things are supposed to work, and that's why I'm very new to this whole film snob world, and it's very confusing to me. Now, truthfully, I started watching this movie in December. I watched the first hour. I thought it was very interesting, well written, tightly plotted. And then I went to bed, and then I didn't finish it again until, now, when the quarantine hit. The upshot is, I found the film unique and fresh, but I can't say I enjoyed it or learned very much from it, except from a technical perspective. There's a couple of things in there that I'd never seen anywhere else, and that's what you'd expect from somebody who's considered a visionary genius. I consider this film a craft, and I mean that in a very respectful way. It's well made, like a beautiful car's engine. Everything's tuned, and everything works well and runs beautifully. But if you're asking me, do I want to put that engine in my car? Maybe not. In this case, my car symbolizes my brain, I guess, and the engine symbolizes the movie, as we established. So what gives? Why did it take me months to finish, and why was it such a chore to do so? I could say, it's boring. But I don't think it was ever truly boring. I don't think I was ever really bored. I could say that it made me feel uncomfortable, but I'm used to being made to feel uncomfortable by media. The dialogue was great. I've actually started using some of the lines, obviously not the actual lines because they're in Russian, but paraphrased, translated versions of them. Why don't I like Stalker? Because I'm not a film buff. No matter how much I want to be, I can't change who I am overnight. I can't force myself to enjoy something, no matter how well made, no matter how much I read about it and know about it and come to appreciate aspects of it. The whole is still something that was made for somebody other than me. This was made for the film-going audience that really enjoys tough, naughty, difficult questions. Naughty as in knots, not naughty as in naughty. While I can intellectually appreciate that Stalker is a beautiful thing, a well-made, well-crafted piece of art, I can't make myself love it. The ambiguity, the slow pacing, it's just not what I'm used to. Now, I will be looking into other Tarkovsky movies, and I might even review them here if there's any kind of call for that. But I'm just not that into what I've been shown. The moral of the story is, try new things, but don't be too disappointed if it ends up not being what you expected. Okay, good talk, everybody. I enjoyed that. I like getting that off my chest. Now, if only I could get stuff out of my chest. Haha. Yeah. All right. See you.